welcome to the Wormhole Podcast, episode 12. Joining me today is the author of a stunning novel about indecision and identity, told in snippets. It's called Chemistry, it's poignant, it's funny, and it is uniquely clever. Welcome, Weike Wang.
Hi, thank you for having me.
How are you?
I'm good.
It's mad world at the moment, listeners. We are in the beginnings of our pandemic, so yes, it's a bit crazy here.
Read, I think, right? Because now so much more time to just stay home since the commute is cut out of everything.
Yes, I won't use the hashtag. Stay the something home, people.
Yeah.
So, to get into your writing and your background is in chemistry and public health. You graduated from Harvard with these degrees, but obviously you're also a writer. How have you come to mix these, and are you still doing chemistry?
No, so a little bit about how my strange background. As an undergrad, I had studied chemistry. That was my major, and I took a great deal of kind of like English classes, writing classes. So effectively, it was kind of a minor in English. And then afterwards, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I thought of medicine for a long time, but in the end, I don't think that was sort of my trajectory. And I went into public health, effectively epidemiology, which is kind of timely at this point. So I studied for 6 years in chronic disease epidemiology, so looking at cancer, looking at the effects of diet on cancer. And after that, I still wasn't sure. I guess it's just you never really know. I kind of took this like mad gamble and applied to a master's in fiction program at Boston University. It was a 1-year program, and I thought, why not? During this time, I could still do my research in epidemiology and also write. And chemistry was the thesis out of that year. It was kind of a culmination of working on a novel project and stories. And I guess luck in a way that I was able to finish the project. I had great advisors who helped me get it into the hands of an editor. And that's sort of just effectively it was dumb luck in a way. Because I think if I hadn't finished the project, I wouldn't have been able to get the book out, and it would have just taken longer, and I would have been more likely to probably go into research. So I'm not doing chemistry anymore, just because it's hard to, I've always told it's hard to do science as a hobby, right? It's always easier to do writing as a hobby and science as like a career. You can't do it the other way around. So once you kind of get off this science research wagon, it's really hard to get back on. So I just hope this works out.
Well, I think so far it is.
Yeah, it's not bad.
So, on the writing note, I saw that you wrote an introduction for Charlotte Bronte's Villette. Does Bronte inspire your writing, and who else inspires you?
I took this wonderful seminar in college about the Brontes, so reading everything by the Brontes. And I took it because I really liked the professor, and I was just interested in what an English seminar class was like. And their writing was just very inspirational because I felt I didn't shy away from a lot of the pain and suffering, but it was also a very robust writing. And it was just something I'd never encountered. I hadn't read the Brontes in high school or growing up. It wasn't my canon. I was very STEM heavy when I was growing up. So it was just my first introduction to that kind of writing that was just very raw, but also there's a strength in the writing. And that was my first exposure to, I guess, Victorian literature and sort of like the English canon. And what inspires me, I guess, now is a lot more of kind of the contemporary writers. So contemporary literature, reading a great deal of sort of short stories and novels that are written in more of an experimental or stylized way. One of my professors at BU, her name was Sigrid Nunez, and I applied to BU because I knew about her a little, and I knew her work was extraordinary, and I just thought it would be great to kind of study under her. And she's a great writer, and she's, a great mentor, but her work has always been sort of memoir-esque fiction and sort of genre blending in that way. In college, I also had taken classes with Amy Hempel, who is a great short story writer, very, very lean. And that taught me a lot about cutting out fat in my writing. So kind of those kind of female writers have always been very inspirational to me in what I can learn from them.
I've got a question later about the writing style, so we'll kind of go back to that in a bit. We should probably get onto your novel. It's about a young Chinese-American PhD student of chemistry who starts to feel unsure about what she's doing in life. She's unsure about her studies, her long-term relationship, and she feels a lot of pressure from her parents to live up to their wishes. She doesn't know what to do, both in herself and with all the advice. She's got lots of advice going on. The story is told in vignettes from our unnamed narrator, who is wonderfully clever and unintentionally and maybe intentionally funny. And she also has a dog who is a crucial aspect of the novel too. And Weike is actually talking to me on video, and she's got her dog here, which is great. So we're going to talk about that later. So why an unnamed narrator?
That's a good question, because I recently just finished a story and I realized I don't really name most of my characters. I mean, in the second novel, I've started to name more characters, but I think with names, I've always found that what goes along with a name is an identity of a character. And it says a lot, like what I name a character, right? About their background, about sort of their upbringing, about, ethnic or cultural identity. And I just, sometimes for my characters, I can't always pinpoint it, right? And I'd rather not explain it. So for that, I didn't want to name the characters in this book. It's also easy to get away with for the first person, because I don't need to name the first person if I'm writing I, that sort of thing. And since the book was so internal for her, most of the characters in there are always in relation to this protagonist. So you have the best friend, you have the mother, the father, you have her employer, her boss, her ex-boss, her therapist, effectively. And I think the only character that I couldn't quite find a definite relationship for her was her boyfriend, Eric, but that's why I gave him a name, since his role changes, whereas the other ones are fairly stagnant. So that was my decision for this book. With some of the other things that I've written, stories that I don't name characters, I think maybe also another reason is, the names is tethered so often to identity. But also, I'm just so terrible with names. Like, there are certain writers who are just so good with names. The Brontes, they're all good with names. I just don't think I'm very gifted at naming these characters.
I don't know. You could have called her Jane Eyre or something. That would be No, I thought it was good, especially rereading. You get to that bit in the book where she goes for a takeaway coffee, and she gives everybody else's name. I'm like, oh.
yeah, I know. And it's like something that I think she's just very resistant to, in a way, right? I imagine she's one of these characters, and I grew up in this kind of community of characters who, not characters, friends and peers who were just a little bit embarrassed by their name, or they were changing their name, or they were trying to Americanize their name or make it easier to pronounce. And it just caused a lot of sort of just internal grief. And I think I didn't quite want to get into that for this book, so I'm just thinking, let's just skip that name part, because she has a few more other issues to deal with.
So the narrator's boyfriend, he is a sort of a long-suffering boyfriend. He wants to get married. Right. He's kind of less included than the dog in a way, which we'll talk about later. But yet he's still very much there in the case that he's kind of reported on from the narrator's viewpoint, as you said. How did you come to strike that balance between his presence and the lack of the presence?
Well, part of that comes from the structure of the book. When I started the book, I knew how it had to be structured, and when Eric was going to leave, when potentially he would come back. I think with Eric, he is so wrapped up in his own world, right? That sometimes he has these goals that he wants to achieve as well. And she, for part of the novel, there's a part in the novel where she just says she feels like she's slowing him down, right? Or she feels like she is slowing down, whereas he is so direct. He's so, he doesn't take any detours. And I wanted to give that effect that she was lagging. So bit by bit, Eric is just gaining speed, is just moving farther and farther away, so that eventually he's going to be out of her visual range, right? Because he will keep working towards what he wants to work towards. And he's giving her this chance to, let's be together, but it will hurt him, but he knows he'll get over it if she doesn't follow in a way, right? So that's kind of how I pictured Eric, as this good boyfriend, but sometimes a little bit blindsided by the things that are bothering her. And it's sort of this, two people jogging, and then slowly this one person starts to move ahead, and eventually they can't see each other anymore.
Well, he has everything together what he wants, and she doesn't. Right. So on the dog, I know when I read the book the first time, I saw him almost as a comedic aspect, and I loved it. And during the reread that I did recently, he seemed more a sort of a physical manifestation, in a way, of what's going on with our narrator. Is there something to this? What was he always a part of the book, and can you discuss his role?
Well, he came into the picture because at that time, as you know, I have a dog. I've never had a dog before, so that was this is my first dog. And I just found that, and I was actually very resistant to getting a dog at the beginning because I just thought, this dog doesn't talk to me. How am I going, what is the point, right? Because I didn't have pets before. So then I got, we got a dog, and I thought, oh my gosh, I just end up talking to him every day for no reason. He obviously never replies. He will never know my name. But there's just this understanding, and I wanted her to have a friend that was able to sort of mirror kind of her internal frenzy, but not necessarily have quote unquote problems of his own. Like, the dog obviously has problems, but not these existential problems that she's having, and also not the same kind of problems that her best friend ends up having. So I just wanted this companion who was sort of loyal in this way that dogs are loyal, but also non-judgmental, right? And wants absolutely nothing from her. It's just so hard to find a person who's like that, because those kind of people don't exist. But, she's realizing that this companion she just needed to have this friend who I think demands nothing from her. And she needs to realize that she can also be less demanding on herself.
So is he based on your dog? Is there a personality there?
In a way, I sort of made this dog bigger in the book. I wanted this to be like a full-size dog, but my dog is much smaller. In some ways, it's based on my dog. I think my dog is less interactive than the dog in this book. But once you have a dog, you end up meeting so many crazy dogs. You just end up bidding them together into this one crazy dog.
Should we have that first reading?
Oh, sure. Yes, of course. This section comes near the middle of the book. The premise starts with Eric asking this narrator a question about marriage, and she still hasn't decided. And this is near the middle when her indecision has some consequences. So I'll start. The breaking of bonds requires energy. This is a fundamental law of thermodynamics. We walk along the river, arms crossed, me, hands in pocket, him. The river is very polluted, I say. Take care of yourself, he says. College kids jump in there all the time. It's 3 meals a day and the occasional glass of wine. 1 in 10 succeed, the other 9 swim to shore terrified. Did you hear what I said? Yes, 3 meals a day taken with wine. Packing commences. If he is to start in the fall, he must leave in early summer to set up his lab. The dog is frantic but strategic. He sits on shoes so Eric won't pack them. He sits on clothes so Eric won't fold them. He sits inside luggage bags so Eric won't close them. I try to lure him away with treats. Big juicy marrow bones, beef jerky, 2 scoops of vanilla ice cream. But he doesn't come. Packing takes days. We clean up the spot where he pees. He pees all over Eric's ties. We take these ties to the dry cleaners and wait for them to call us. We clean up the spot where he poos. He poos all over Eric's best suit. We take the suit to the dry cleaner and wait for them to call us. What's wrong with your dog? They ask. Willful incontinence. We finish packing when the dog has run out of ideas. But not quite. At the gate, he goes through his repertoire of tricks. Sit, lie down, crawl, play dead, roll over, high five. Sit, lie down, crawl, play dead, roll over, high five. I asked him to please be dignified about this, but I've not yet taught him that command. Dog, Eric says, and bends down to scratch his ears. Man, dog says, and lets out a long howl. Furrowed brows, both of them. A frustrated dog will shed, and now I must follow him around with a lint roller. It's doable, I say to the shrink, to drive to Oberlin in one furious night. But that is not love, she says, that is fear of facing your own demons. I don't have demons, I say. I have students and a dog, but at night I do close all my closets out of fear of what might be inside. Dark matter, I believe. I tell the best friend. He left, and I let him. He said he would try not to call. What are you going to do? She asks. Not dwell, move forward. What are you really going to do? Stare at spoons. I tell the math student, me and the dog make 2, and 2 points to find a line. Remember what Doctor Who said about lines, not at all interesting. You need 3 or more points to define a shape. The triangle is the strongest of all the shapes. When you think geometry, think triangles. The theorem that everyone knows by name, Pythagoras, is a theorem about a triangle. If I could go back in time, I would design apartments that could not echo. I would evoke sound's ability to echo in the first place. It is the echo and the dark matter that keep me up at night. If I could go back in time, I would sleep and sleep. But Hawking makes a very simple case for why time travel is not possible. No one in the past has come forward, and no one in the future has come back. There was a mnemonic I used to use in chemistry to remember the order of the 4 fundamental alkanes. It was me eat peanut butter, which stood for methane, ethane, propane, butane. I feel like I should not just be eating this stuff out of the jar. The first time, he asks, we are at the Esplanade in the morning for a fireworks show that will start at night. It is the 4th of July. We have brought a blanket, a basket, a dog. He has brought a ring, but I don't know that yet. We wait for the sun to go down and the sky to light up. My head is on his lap the whole time. And then the sky lights up. I should have noticed the change in his demeanor. He is not cheering like I am, but studying the sky. He is searching for the largest firework under which he will present me with the ring, not in the palm of his hand, but as he tells me later, like a telescope in front of my eye. Not this one, or this one, or this one. The largest one is coming at the end, and then the barge from which the fireworks launched catches on fire and the show abruptly stops. This cannot be happening, he says. So we stay another minute while everyone around us scatters. When the barge is fully consumed by flames and other boats are speeding to its rescue, we have to be evacuated in case the barge explodes. I say, we'll come back next year, and he says he can't wait until then. I say, we'll watch another show on TV, and he says he can't do that either. I don't understand until on the train back, in a tunnel, he puts the ring on my knee.
That has my favourite bit of the novel in there, because I do love the dog. But it's a very good section overall because it just shows you all the different aspects of the book. So the writing style of the vignettes, and you've got the tense changes in there, and it's kind of fractured but not at the same time. You know, is this something that you like to do in general? Is this something that you might take further, do you think, in your other fiction? You know, if we can talk about more about why you came to decide to write it in that way.
Mm-hmm. For me, the way that I think about narrative is chronological. The story is told chronologically, but some writers are very good at setting the entire scene, sort of pulling this world out, describing everything to this great detail. And when I write, I kind of zoom in on certain things that I know I want to put in the story, and then go from there. So the way that I thought about this is I knew certain scenes were going to happen. I knew what you said, the vignettes, the moments. But I didn't necessarily want to extend the moment to sort of set the scene fully, because I wanted to effectively get to the point, right? Or figure out ways to present that information in a new way, but also let the white space do a lot of work. So Amy, she was one of my earliest fiction teachers. She mentioned this great quote, and that's how she thinks about it, is thinking about the white space, thinking about omission. She kept saying omission is also creation. So leaving things out can also help create a story in the same way that putting many, many things in. And I wanted to strike a balance of that with the style. I wrote a great deal more than what's on these pages. And sometimes the way that I write is I write the story and I just I start to delete things. So I might delete a third of a scene. And eventually what I get is something a little bit more, it's sharper, at least, how I read it or how I think about it. It's a little bit sharper, and there are a little bit more jumps in the sentences. And I like that because it asks a good deal more of the reader. I want the reader to also be paying attention and engaged with the story. I also want the reader to kind of make the jumps with the author and fill in those gaps in the story.
I'm wondering how much book there would have been overall then.
I think
Not that it's not perfect as it is.
yeah, I think for every book or every story, I have two documents open. I have the actual document, and then I have this other document that's called something something excess. So whatever I'm working on, like chemistry excess, and that's probably twice as long as the actual thing. So it's actually kind of scary. I have trouble deleting anything, so I cut it out and I put it in this folder or this document that's just titled excess, and it's just everything I cut out of the novel or the story that I'm writing.
So you potentially got lots of ideas then that you could use for other books.
Yeah, I think I'm always a little bit nervous about taking up too much of the reader's time or sort of making the story drag for no purpose. I'm trying to be, I guess, economical with the space. And maybe that's just a little bit of my science training, for science papers and for any kind of like conferences or posters. They always give you a word limit and you're always just sitting there shaving words. I'm trying to say this in the most efficient way. And I think that kind of weaves into my narrative as well. I try to have a point for each part, each white space I'm trying to take up.
Mm-hmm. So the unnamed narrator, she is a wonderful character. When did she first arrive in your mind, so to speak?
Well, the first novel for any writer, a debut novel, is generally pretty straightforward to come to and write because you've had so much experience with it. This narrator probably came to me when I was in college. At that time, I was working in a chemistry lab, and I knew a lot of grad students who were having a difficult time in a chemistry lab. Because I had hung out with those grad students and I was close friends with them, I ended up not going into chemistry grad school. But I sort of saw these characters and my friends and their trajectory in these 5 years of studying. I didn't, nobody obviously quit grad school that I knew of, but there were so many conversations of I'm going to do it tomorrow, and then backing away from that. So I think in college I started thinking about, well, what if somebody actually did quit, or what if somebody actually did leave? How would that person feel? Because once a person leaves, everybody in the lab still carries on their actual work, but we don't actually see what that other person is going through. So I probably started developing this character in college. That was probably my most intense kind of lab experience. As a grad student, I actually had a great time with my grad program. I really enjoyed working with my advisor. I had a very healthy relationship with him. The lab was also fun. It was a complete 180 from this narrator. But I think I was still talking to a lot of my friends in chemistry and sort of seeing how those like very formative years in grad school still had, I guess, echoes or sort of ripples through their current life.
So it's kind of write what you know with a caveat then. In a
Yeah.
So, I mean, I did have that question, how much of your own experience influenced the book? Because reading it, obviously, you've got your background, you've got your chemistry and your writing. And I did wonder, if it was your own take to some extent. But something I did want to talk about is we've got the culture here of the Chinese American and her parents. And then, of course, balance with the Western individualism. How did you come to strike this balance, and how important was this to the overall effect?
That's a good question. I come from having been trained in STEM and science for so long. I do enjoy science. There's so much of it that I love. I think I love the big picture of it so much more than the detail of it, which is what research ends up becoming. I think I was interested in writing a STEM character or a Asian American background who is not necessarily going to be this stereotype or this cliche, but also was not going to turn away from that stereotype or cliche. So many of the Asian Americans that I know are always saying, well, I'm not the stereotype because I love doing X, Y, and Z. I love to hike. I love to, I don't know, play pool, as almost to justify the fact that they're not sort of these like robotic, like Asian workers. And I still wanted to present a character who was invested in her STEM background, but is also obviously not robotic or not one-dimensional. I didn't really want to run away from that kind of background that she had, and to have her go into art or to have her go into sculpture or something like that. I did want her to embrace that background, but also have tension with it, because I think that's everyone. That's just no matter what you end up doing, you always have some sort of tension with it. So that's kind of the balance I was trying to strike. in the writing that, like contemporary literature and the contemporary stories, so many of the characters are writers, right? Because writers write them. And I wanted to bring this sort of scientific mind to something that potentially I could make into art. So trying to find that balancing point for those two.
Well, you say about bringing in the art and the balance. And something on that in the terms, you've got all these metaphors of chemistry. The book sports a lot of ways that facts of chemistry apply to life in general. There's a lot in there that kind of makes a lot of sense. I'm not a chemist at all. I know very little. But there was just so much truth in there that I thought we kind of miss out. But, maybe it's just your book. You've brought it in a really good way. But is there a lot that you see in chemistry that we can learn from, I suppose?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what growing up in a science world taught me was there's a great deal in chemistry and physics and math, in these sort of harder sciences that I think writers and artists tend to shy away from, that I think is actually quite simple as long as it's sort of explained well or applied well. Obviously it's not that no one's missing out. It's just there's so much of aversion, especially currently in America, of, I'm not good at science, or I'm not good at math, or I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to touch this. And I sometimes think it's just the approach, right? It's finding an avenue into these fields that we can have a relationship with. Obviously, what I don't put in here is sort of the day-to-day drudgery. Learning the stuff is pretty tedious. It takes a lot of years. It takes practice. But then after all this time, you sort of get something very distilled, and you gain an understanding, a way to think about things that might be slightly different. So I'm sort of encouraging a way to, think about, this narrator thinks about her whole life through this lens of science. And sometimes it distracts her. Sometimes it gives her some truth. Sometimes it takes her on a long, meandering path. But it's also how her mind works. And I think it's kind of finding a way for science to sort of be a part of our life instead of being this other thing. Oh, this is what other people do. We have our scientists and researchers, and they're going to do their own thing. But, the writers and the artists are over here, and there's no conversation between them. I find that to be sometimes restricting, right? That those two groups are never going to talk to each other in a kind of a meaningful way, just because there's a lack of understanding between them.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Yeah, that's a lot to think about in that. We could definitely, we learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, just for starters, yeah. So we've got another reading. Shall we have a reading now?
Sure, yeah. So this is a little bit shorter, but this is in the second part. And part of this story is also the narrator's relationship with her parents, and the narrator's coming to think about our parents in a new way, or to understand them. There were times when I told my father, all you want me to do is study. All you want me to do is achieve. I am tired of learning everything. What use is all this knowledge when in school they're still calling you a freak? I could not tell that in his questions the many times he motioned me over to teach me one of the three things was this desire for me to be fearless. Is being fearless better than being pretty? My mother, for all her looks, marries my father, who is not handsome. When they meet, she must see something different in him. He is serious, often too serious, and she finds this intriguing or maybe endearing. If he is going to make it abroad, she tells her, he is going to get a PhD. At the time, my mother thinks, a PhD? What is that? No one around her is getting one, much less thinking of doing it abroad. The face, the body, my mother refers to these things as hardware. You cannot change them. But you can change what you know, and the mind she refers to as software. Though is that true? There is makeup, surgery, weight loss. Hardware is easily changeable nowadays. Beauty is weakness, I remember a model saying during an interview. She was referring to when people see how gorgeous she is, they immediately think that she is not strong. But I think my mother would have had a harder time here if she were not beautiful. When she arrives, she begins using beauty as a shield. She does not enjoy being poor, who does, but she manages, adopts the saying, if you are beautiful, you will look good in anything, even this shabby little number from Kmart. Also, what does she have now if not beauty? There's her wit, and how to get across wit in a language she does not speak. My mother is not dumb. She knows beauty is not everlasting. So she tells me often, "You are not beautiful. Do not think yourself beautiful." And I am angry at her for a long time. "It is a double-edged sword to be smart and beautiful," says the best friend. And this is probably very close to what every woman wants. I, too, had high hopes of growing up into both a genius and a bombshell, to be Marie Curie, but then to also look like Grace Kelly.
Just to let you know, readers, that was Waike's dog just scratching himself there, if you heard that. So, ever so slightly on the note of culture and what we've been talking about, whilst our narrator grows into an understanding of who she is and what she wants to be, it seems she also grows in her knowledge of language. There are many moments when she thinks of the times that her use of English is called into question by people, idioms and metaphors and so on. Was this part of the growth always important to have?
For this narrator, yes. I don't think she's finished with it by the end. She has quite a ways to go. But she is trying to reconcile her parents' desires for her. Her parents are immigrants, and with that comes so much pressure and so much responsibility for the child to succeed. And she sort of also ties that into womanhood, right? Being a woman scientist is so encouraged. Being, strong is so encouraged. Being a smart woman is so encouraged. And, her parents are also saying you have to do something in which maybe your race is taken out of the equation. And that's, for most people, that is STEM, that's medicine, right? So she has so many competing pressures on her, and she feels like by not doing anything, she's effectively letting everyone down. Not just her parents, but this whole team of women who are telling her, "You're in science, this is good, you need to keep going, you need to do this for our future." And so it's just a great deal of pressure that I think she's ends up cracking under. So there is, that's all part of her identity, that she has her past with her parents, her relationship with her mother, and also her relationship with this kind of abstract group of, I guess, society that says, "You're making us proud, don't not make us proud," right?
Mm. On that note further, we get a fair glimpse of where our narrator is headed beyond the last pages, but there are still things that she needs to work out, and maybe, the readers need to think about it as well. But I was wondering if I could ask, might she be a successful teacher one day? May she carry this forward?
I think so. I think she, currently in this book, she's teaching as kind of a way to get by, but I think she would be a good teacher. She's generous with her time, and she's a little bit quirky, and I think students kind of like that in a teacher maybe. And she seems to not mind, having conversations with different kinds of students. There's a math student in there, and she has other students who sort of just want to learn but don't know how. And through her teaching, she's able to kind of discover her enjoyment of science again, a small part that I feel like she forgot at the beginning of the book.
Well, I know I kind of finished the book wondering if she was going to go back to it one day, because she is so good at it. The amount of knowledge, obviously I'm a lay person, but she just seems to know so much, that comes from you as well. But yeah, and you just think, you can see why she's finished, but at the same time, she knows a lot. There is one other thing on a very different subject again, but my last question on this book. You've got this thing with PhD advisors having the final say.
Yeah.
And people having trouble, you don't shy away from saying that people do have real extreme trouble. Don't want to get into exactly what it is potentially, but how real is this, I suppose, for people who may not have that experience of PhDs?
I think this is pretty real. I think it's more real in the hard sciences. So the way that I think about hard sciences would be probably physics, biology, chemistry, things in which you're needed in lab kind of on a day-to-day basis. It's probably a little different in the social sciences, so epidemiology, econometrics, in which more of the work is not necessarily done in kind of this confined space. I think that's what makes the hard sciences challenging, is that everybody's in this lab for 5 years, sharing space, and you're talking right next to them, and things can really go wrong pretty quickly. So, and I think it really kind of depends on the school. Like, I had the fortune and also the misfortune of having a really, really harsh undergrad advisor. But eventually, once you go high enough in these fields, you meet these people, right? And they're very, very demanding. They have timelines, and they sort of are very goal-oriented. But I also had a really great PhD advisor who was calm, very supportive, nice, talked to me about things other than my work. But sometimes scientists are, they have 30 people in that lab. There's no way that they can remember everybody in their lab. And they're always going to conferences. Well, not anymore, but, they're always going to conferences, traveling, and giving talks. So they're not really there. And when they're there, they just want to know the facts, right? They kind of want to know the bullet points. So for some of these grad students, they sort of feel like they're a cog and they're pushing out work for the advisor. And as the bigger the lab grows, the more often advisors forget that part of being an advisor is mentorship, helping someone like a young scientist grow instead of a hazing process. Certain fields, and this also extends into medicine, think about the training for residents and fellows and interns. A lot of kind of the superiors, the supervisor, consider not teaching to be a hazing process. Like, if I could do it, you can do it. You can figure it out on your own. And if you can figure it out on your own, then that's better. That makes you a genius or whatnot. It's almost kind of a sign of weakness to mentor someone in a nurturing way in the hard sciences because we're scientists. So we're going to do this on our own. I think that this perception is falling away slowly as kind of the older generation retires and we sort of have a new breed of scientists. But yeah, I think this kind of relationship is really common of sink or swim.
I think it's easy to think, from a layperson's point of view, it's a really, really hard subject to do. But, hearing you say that, it's harder than I think a lot of people would even imagine. What's next?
So I finished this draft of the second novel, and it has to go through some more edits. But this novel is going to be about a doctor. I have everybody named, and it's kind of a quirky novel. It's a little surreal. It's a little absurdist. It's about this doctor and what happens when a new neighbor moves in. And during this kind of strange time, her father passes away, and she's kind of figuring out how to handle her brother and sister-in-law at the same time. So it's definitely a little different from this one. The character is a little bit different, but I sort of wanted to explore similar themes. But there's also this idea of this kind of like strange workaholic doctor and how she's coming to justify her life in like an unusual way.
Yeah. That sounds very interesting. It sounds like there's a little bit of aspect of chemistry, but very different at the same time. So, I mean, obviously, we're talking right now and the world is very, very different. But do you have any idea of when this novel might be coming to us?
I think probably next year. My hope is next year. We'll see. Editing takes a while, and this year is an election year, so we'll see what happens at the end of this year in terms of, what happens with the editing and kind of the marketing. And given that we have such like a delay in timeline, the books that are getting published now, I think, are getting a little postponed. And, later this year, we'll see what happens with our country. And hopefully next year.
I do say sometimes, readers, when we've got a book coming, note it down. In this case, absolutely note it down. Keep an eye on it. So, Chemistry is available to purchase now, and links are in the episode description. If you have enjoyed our discussion, do subscribe to the podcast for future episodes. Weike, it has been fabulous having you on the show. I'm just so glad we did this. It's great. Yeah. I made so many notes when reading this the first time, and it's one of the first books. I don't usually highlight many sections, but this one, I came back to it to read. I was like, my goodness, yeah, I really enjoyed that one. So yeah, it's been great having you. Thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for your questions. They're all so good.
Join me on Monday, the 27th of April, when I will be talking to Dan Richards, author of The Beechwood Airship Interviews, Climbing Days, and Outpost. The Wormhole Podcast, Episode 12, was recorded on the 21st of March and published on the 13th of April, 2020. Music and production by Charlie Place.